And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. And the way things are setting up here for the mid and late week period is we have some energy, low pressure and moisture frontal systems wrapping around and then being pulled up across the panhandle along the Gulf Coast. Meanwhile, another low transversing the lower Bering Sea and the Aleutians with a front. That energy is heading off toward the east-southeast and then will be incorporated later in the week and early weekend into just a general low pressure circulation that just allows for fronts and smaller lows to be pulled back to the north and west. Meantime, as we get through this Tuesday, there was a pretty good burst of snow this Monday night into Tuesday morning over the western Kenai, west side of Anchorage, and then up into the west end of the Susitna Valley, especially along the Alaska Range. And that moisture will continue northward and over the other side of the Alaska Range as we go through this Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning, all the way up along and north of the Yukon River. So that's why we have these IFR conditions expected Wednesday morning and lower ceilings and some snow. Also, just with that upslope flow along this stretch of the Alaska Range from around Windy Pass down through Rainy Pass, we expect IFR conditions. Also along the western area, Prince William Sound, here into the northern panhandle, there's going to be another push of moisture come northward and produce snow. Winter storm watch in effect for areas of the northern panhandle. The winter weather advisory along the northeastern Gulf Coast will continue at least into the early part of Wednesday, and then off to the west a band of what we have IFR conditions from the eastern Aleutians back out to north of Shimmy in the lower southwest part of the Bering Sea. Wednesday afternoon, IFR conditions, intercoastal mountains there of the inner channels of the Panhandle and the northern areas, including Haines, Chilkoot, and White. Then as we get back here, it will get inside of Yakutat Bay and extending across, especially along the west side of Prince William Sound in the far eastern Kenai Peninsula. That initial push of moisture has come all the way northward up along the Brooks Range, west side of the North Slope. So we expect IFR conditions up that way for Wednesday afternoon. And then as low pressure comes east-southeastward along the frontal boundary, we have a band of IFR conditions that extend up into the lower Alaska Peninsula. On Thursday morning, a continuation of feed of moisture coming inland, so we're looking at IFR conditions north of the Alaska Range, the Tanana Valley, even up into the 40-mile Gold Country, down across the Copper River Basin, eastern Talkeetna Mountains, along the Gulf Coast, inner channels of the Panhandle, especially the inner coastal mountains of the southeast, all IFR Thursday morning, and then a band of IFR conditions again, demarking where that area of low pressure and frontal boundary lie, and that energy is coming east-southeastward and will be absorbed into the general Gulf circulation here for the end of the week. And then finally, Thursday afternoon, we expect generally MVFR conditions over the Panhandle. Few pockets of IFR possible, maybe up toward Hyder and the area there just to the southwest of Haines. And then we're still looking at some MVFR conditions, the Yukon Valley up into the south slopes of the Brooks Range, and then hints of IFR conditions just south-southwest there of the western half of the Aleutians. Pass conditions for Wednesday, Anaktuvuk Pass, MVFR becoming IFR with that moisture gliding northward. Could include some light snow as well, lower ceilings and visibilities. Adigan Pass, MVFR also becoming IFR. Lake Clark and Merrill should hold on to MVFR conditions on Wednesday, at least in that portion. The west arm of the Alaska Range, a little further north, Rainy Pass very well could become, if not remain, IFR. And then Windy Pass, IFR conditions becoming MVFR. And further east, Isabel Pass should generally see MVFR conditions on Wednesday. Mentasta Pass may start out early Wednesday, VFR becoming MVFR. And then as we drop down through the Copper River Basin, Tanita Pass is looking generally MVFR on Wednesday. And Portage Pass, pretty much the eastern half and out into Prince William Sound will be IFR. The western half, especially the west entrance, will remain MVFR. And then in the far northern portion of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White likely see IFR conditions with some accumulating snow, low ceilings, visibilities. And freezing levels. The surface freezing line extends out through the central Bering, dipping down south and east of the Alaska Peninsula along the east side of Kodiak Island up through the northern Gulf Coast. and then cutting across the inner channels of the Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft, nothing too impressive in terms of warmer air aloft, either associated with a frontal system or with a ridge of high pressure. We do have a little bit of ridging this way, 2,000 and 4,000 feet, but we're talking Haida Gwaii well off of Vancouver Island there. And as far as icing potential, because of the moisture fields, the troughiness, and these weaker areas of low pressure pulling back to the northwest, we're going to find areas of moderate icing in the clouds, a lot of stratus clouds. Any of those that are producing precipitation get above 4,000 feet. There could be moderate icing anywhere from the Panhandle along the Gulf Coast into the Kenai Peninsula, including Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait, and then running up along and south of the Alaska Range with some moisture spilling over into the Tanana Valley. And then behind me with that low pressure frontal system, we expect a broad band of potential moderate icing associated with that feature, especially above 4,000 feet. Upper level jet stream winds. Winds are not especially strong anywhere over the mainland, but behind me there is a jet core in excess of 120 knots well southwest of the Aleutian Chain. And then out over western Canada, we're looking at generally a south-southwest flow between about 60 to 75 knots. At 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, we start to see some areas of enhanced wind along the northeastern Gulf Coast, that frontal boundary or trough. We also find some stronger winds in the mid-levels, 35 to 40 knots across the western interior up into the Brooks Range. We're looking at south winds upwards of 40 knots there. And then down here, southwest of the Aleutians, there's a wind max there at 9,000 feet of 75 knots. And then as we bring it down further to 3,000 feet, we have a belt of stronger east-southeast winds above the surface, anywhere from 35 to locally 55 knots there above Utqiagvik. And then as we look out across the Bering, we have this band of stronger winds, 45 to 60 knots along and just south of the Aleutian Chain with the north end of the front easterly flow, 35 to 40 knots. And then as I step aside here, we have a kind of a barrier low-level jet along a trough or frontal boundary associated with this area of low pressure is going to pull back to the north and west. And so as a result, it could be locally stronger winds of 50 to as high as 65 knots there outside of Yakutat Bay, Cape Suckling, Kayak Island. And then, of course, that translates to the greatest threat of turbulence on Wednesday along areas of the Gulf Coast, including the Panhandle. Pretty widespread moderate turbulence, likely surface to 5,000 feet, but we could find some isolated severe turbulence, especially outside of Yakutat Bay, Cape Suckling on over to outside there of Hinchinbrook Entrance. And then further north, we expect some moderate turbulence along and just north of the Yukon River on the far south slopes of the Brooks Range, and then up along the spine of the Brooks Range, especially in the western north slope to the Lisburn Peninsula. We're looking at potential for moderate turbulence, surface to 3,000 feet. And then finally further southwestward, the Aleutian Chain, especially central western Aleutians, there may be moderate turbulence on Wednesday, surface to 3,000 feet.